Fire when ready.
Cool.
It's down on the bottom right. Down on the bottom right, you can click the slideshow setting.
View. Oh, start slideshow. Thanks, guys. Good afternoon. This is my chop on Alfred Kazan's A Walker in the City, in which, as you've previously heard, is kind of his memoir of his time growing up in, particularly in Brownsville, New York, which is a neighborhood in the eastern part of Brooklyn, New York. It's a mere 2.19 square miles. It's not really all that big. But during Cage's time period, it was actually one of the most densely populated areas in Brooklyn. Um, and it's been known through the years, actually since the early 20th century, as being a place of slums and breeding of crime. And I actually have a picture up here of Mike Tyson. He's another native of Brownsville. He actually had been arrested, I think, 38 times by the time he was 14. And not to say that Brownsville is full of Mike Tysons, but that's just kind of giving you an idea of the environment and what exactly was going on at the time. And so we start off with, in Casey's article, talking about subway rides that he would have with his father when he'd be going to the city, and then kind of coming back into Brownsville, and he kind of had those are we there yet moments, because he's kind of antsy and didn't really know where he was at the time, and so he was just kind of in anticipation of getting back to Brownsville. He actually said that he felt that he was saddling up for a camel ride to a distant land whenever he would go into Manhattan, because he saw it as such a distant and unfamiliar place, because Brownsville was what he knew. Brownsville was where he experienced most of his life growing up. And so he also described just New York City being just completely different, as I said, and he felt that Brownsville was in the city but not of the city, and that it had its own distinct flavor, distinct culture, many things that had just been able to brew and shape him into the person that he was. So basically throughout the article, he just talks about a lot of nostalgic moments. For example, he gets to the various senses and talking about the lumber yards and the different smells and wood. He also talks about junkyards, everything that he could see, as well as touch, taste, and all of the different things that happened while he was there. And as you can see, I have a picture of the junkyard. Just in that was kind of the motif that he tried to give throughout the article, is that he was not just seeing all this, but he was amongst it. He was running around in the junkyards with his friends. He was going up and down streets. He was just a real part of what exactly was going on. And I think coming up, I have a picture of a lady in Brownsville. She's a shopkeep. This is actually from Brownsville in 1951, the time that Kazan actually wrote the article, which I felt was interesting because he's kind of walking around the city describing what's going on. He's seeing the different people out selling stuff on the streets. He's seeing different things every time that he's walking around. He's remembering stuff from the past, but also seeing things new. This is another picture from Brownsville in 1951. It seems like these are nicer homes, not necessarily as slum as they could be, but perhaps these were some of the streets that Kazan actually walked down himself, and what he saw as he was going down, even though it's obviously covered in snow. I'm sure he didn't really let that stop him from having experiences. And we were talking about walking and what exactly that meant for Kazan, because for Kazan, walking was his method of exploration. He became not just an observer of what was going on, but an actual participant. And by walking, he was able to stimulate all the senses. He could smell, he could touch, he could taste, he could see everything that was going on, he could hear. And he actually had a passage in which he talked about going to Coney Island, New York, which is another suburb of Brooklyn, or another neighborhood of Brooklyn. It's actually known for having a big amusement park. He talked about having hot dogs, in particular Nathan's hot dogs, I would assume, because Coney Island is famous for having Nathan's hot dogs, which are actually really good. I've never had the experience of having a Nathan's hot dog. And you would also talk about going to various places, just sitting back, reading, while also talking to his friends and interacting. He really felt that this was his home. This is where this was his place of refuge, his place of comfort. He could sit down with his back against the junkyard fence and not feel weird. And he also talked about the various people that you would encounter when in Brownsville. This is another picture of Brownsville in 1951. You can see a great mix of different peoples black faces, white faces, because this was quite common in the Brownsville area. And he would actually talk about how it was not uncommon to see black children playing with white children, and this interaction happening, which was actually which was pretty much unheard of at the time, because this is pre-Brown versus Board of Education. This is still during the times of Jim Crow in the South. And it was just kind of interesting to show that though this place was secluded, a different area, very small, there was this different sense of community, and they all were able to call the place that they were in Brownsville home. Though it was not necessarily the most upscale place, though was not necessarily the most wonderful place to grow up. They all found refuge in this place that they were growing up. And he felt that, I guess, they all had a similar experience in that they all had moved from the city. He talked about poor immigrants and Negroes settling on the outskirts, and that they all knew their backgrounds and didn't really think of themselves as being greater than one another, hence why it always seemed to work. And this is a picture of some immigrants coming from Ellis Island during the earlier 20th century. And here's another picture of shopkeepers, because he talked about just how everything that he saw, everything that was there, just kept adding to this ambiance of a different type of culture. I wouldn't necessarily know if it was all that much different from the culture of the city, but he felt that it was something that made Brownsville in particular its own. He also talked about religion a little bit. This is a picture of a Russian Orthodox church, because he talked about how there were Russian Orthodox churches, Catholic churches. The one Protestant church that was there, he actually said it had been torn down. It had been a pretty run-down building. He himself, being Jewish, he had never actually been able to enter a church, but he talked about his last experience of wanting to go in and see what's going on. And so as far as my questions, Kazin offers this idea that Brownsville is its own separate entity and exists in but not of the city. So do you think that this could be applied to the borough system of New York City as well? My second question is, Kazin speaks briefly about race relations in Brownsville and indicates that for the most part, they were able to coexist in a period in which such interaction